everyone, Miss Carrie here from Miss Carrie's Creations. Welcome to day 14 of our Christmas card video collab. Today I'm going to show you how to use some non-Christmas products to create this Eclipse card with a little money pocket. We're going to start out by making that front panel in Cricut Design Space. We're going to start the project by inserting a square shape onto our canvas. We're going to hit that little unlock icon above size, and we're going to change the width to 8.5 inches and the height to 3 inches. This is going to be the front panel for our card where the letters are cut out. So the next step is to decide on a font. I'm going to be using the word Noel. The O is going to be a wreath, so I just need an N, an E, and an L. Then I'm going to filter my fonts and search for a big block font. Now I'm going to show you a little trick I use here when trying to determine a font to use. If you're like me and you own a bunch of fonts, it can be difficult to choose which one to use for a project, and it's often hard to compare which font might work for the particular item you are creating. Here's a little tip. Duplicate the text. As you can see here, I have duplicated the text a couple of different times, and I am changing the font on each one. This is allowing me to compare each one of the fonts and try to figure out which one is going to work best for the front of this card. After comparing all of the fonts, I chose to use Art Philosophy. Now I need to resize and manipulate each one of these letters. The first thing I need to do is go up to Advanced and ungroup to Letters so that I can move each of these letters individually. I'm going to pull them apart just a little bit here, and I'm going to add a circle shape that is the same size as the wreath stamp I plan on using. I'm not going to be cutting out this circle. It's just going to be used as a placeholder for the moment to help me figure out the spacing between my letters. The wreath stamp is 2 inches high, so I'm going to change the size of the circle, and I'm also going to change the height of each of the letters to 2 inches so that they match the height of that circle image. Now we're going to adjust the spacing between our letters, and we're going to let Design Space help us with this. The first thing I'm going to do is place the N about 1/4 inch from the left side, and then I'm going to place the L about 1/4 inch from the right side. Once the first letter and last letter are in place, I'm going to hold down my Control key, select the other 3 images, and distribute horizontally. This will make each one of the spaces between the letters and that circle equal. Now I'm going to align to top so that all of the letters are aligned across the top. I'm going to select the letters and the background piece, so select all, and then I'm going to center vertically. Now all of the letters are equidistant apart, and they are centered right down the center of that background piece, both vertically and horizontally. There are times you might need to make some minor adjustments like I did with this circle, but for the most part, everything is right where I need it to be. Now I'm going to delete the circle because we are not cutting that out. It was just a placeholder. I'm going to select all, and I'm going to attach. Using attach attaches all the images in place, so when we hit Make It and take a look at Map Preview, you can see everything is right where we need it to cut out for the front panel of this card. Now I just need to peel everything off of the mat. There I have the letters all cut out with the space for my stamped wreath image. I'm just going to flip the mat over and carefully peel both the letters and the front panel. I need to keep all of these elements for the front of my card. The next step is to build a card base with the money holder pocket. I have here a piece of 12 by 12 white daisy cardstock. I'm going to cut it at 8.5 inches by 9 inches. Make sure you keep a hold of that little rectangular scrap. We will need it here in a minute. With the 9-inch side up against the top of your paper trimmer, score at 3 inches and 7 inches. And now we have the base for our pocket slimline card. All you need to do is fold in on each one of those score lines, and now our card base is ready to start decorating. This is going to fit perfectly in a legal size envelope, which measures 4 1/4 by 9 1/2. Remember that scrap piece of paper I told you to save? We're going to use this with some border thin cuts to create a lace border for our card. The border thin cut measures 6 inches and the cardstock measures 8 1/2. Let's take a look at this die. One edge is the lace border and the other edge is an open end. So we can make it as wide as we need, but we're going to have to double it up to make it as long as we need. I'm placing it down on the cardstock on the left side so that the lace end faces out. Then I'm going to run it through my die cutting machine. And once I have the first run cut, I'm going to pick up the die, line up the first lace image of the die with the last lace cut, hold it in place using a couple pieces of Post-it tape, and then I'm going to run it through again. Now we have an 8 1/2 inch long lace border. Now we have all of the parts and pieces to assemble the card. Here's that card base we made, the Noel panel, and the lace border. I also cut a piece of lovely paper, which is not Christmas themed, and I used that heart border across the top. If you take a look at the heart border, you can also see that it is open-ended. So when it cut across the top here, I just have that nice scallop with the little hearts. This pattern piece of paper comes from our year-round lovely collection. It measures 8 1/2 by 2 1/4. The stamps that I'm using for this wreath image also comes from our core catalog. This is called Florals and Flutters. I didn't have a Christmas wreath, so I thought this wreath would work perfectly for the O in Noel. Here I have a piece of white daisy cardstock. I'm going to set it down on the foam insert so I get a nice impression from this stamp. I'm going to load the stamp onto a stamping block, and then I'm going to be stamping the image in both evergreen and sage ink. So the first impression is going to be in evergreen. Then off camera, I'm going to use the matching thin cut to cut out the wreath. To give this wreath a little bit of shadow and dimension, I'm going to stamp it again in sage ink. This time I'm going to rotate the stamp slightly so that the leaves are offset just a bit from the evergreen image. Now when we take a look at this, you can see that that sage just adds a nice shadow layer onto the wreath and gives it a good multi-dimensional look. This wreath is going to be popped up off the card just like the letters. So I'm going to need to cut out a wreath cut between the N and the E. Here I am just taping the die cut in place, and then I'm going to just go off camera and run it through my die cutting machine. All right, now we can start adhering all of the pieces to the card base. I'm going to start out by adhering that pattern paper onto the little fold up pocket. So here I have that green lovely paper, and I'm just going to adhere it onto the card. Right now this is the back of the card. This little flap is going to fold up and it's going to adhere to the inside of the card and create a pocket. The next step is to add that lace border, and to be honest, if I had thought about it, I would have made this Noel cut bigger so that this could be all one piece. But now that we have two pieces, I'm going to need to trim down that border just a little bit so it doesn't show through under the letters. I've added a little adhesive along the flap, and I'm going to fold up the card just so I can make sure that this lace is nice and aligned against the bottom of the card. I did need to realign it just a little bit and trim just a sliver off the edge, but once that's all added to the card, I can go ahead and place the Noel portion on the front flap. I'm going to be using a tape runner and some liquid adhesive to place this down. I want to make sure that the entire panel is glued down onto the card. I don't want any of the in-between portions of the letters to pop up off the card panel. Now that the negative portion of Noel is down on the card, we can start adhering all of the letters into place using some 3D foam tape. Here I just have some leftover foam squares from some of my shaker card making, and I'm just cutting it all apart and adding it onto the back of the N. I want to add a generous amount of foam tape so that every part of this letter stands up off the card. I discovered that it's much easier to cut the foam squares while they're on the backing sheet than trying to cut them while you're holding them. They don't seem to stick to the scissors as much that way. Once I've pulled off all the little backing pieces from that N, I'm going to align it with the little cutout. I'm going to repeat this same process with each one of the letters. Again, adding a generous amount of foam tape on the back of each of the letters so that all of the parts stand up off the card. I don't know if you noticed, but I did place each letter down into the negative portion before I added the tape because I wanted to make sure that I was adding the tape onto the correct side of the layer. Some of these letters you can get flipped around very easily, and so I always like to check before I add the tape. The wreath image is also going to be popped up off the card. Again, I'm adding a generous amount of foam tape on the back, and then I'm going to align it with the little cutout and adhere it onto the card. I felt like this wreath needed a decorative bow, but I didn't want to use anything that stood out too much. So I've grabbed the small bow thin cut, and I've cut the bow out of vellum. Right now, I'm just using a marker to curl the bow portions of this cut. This is a little trick I learned from my friend Andrea Sherman at Girl Plus Paper. You could use any tool that you like, but I've found that if you add a little bit of curl ahead of time, the bow tends to keep its shape, and it's much easier to adhere the pieces together. I've added a small drop of clear glue in the center of the bow, and I'm just folding over each one of those sides and matching the little rectangles in the center. Now I just need to hold it in place for a few minutes until it sets. How precious is this little bow? I think it is going to be the perfect addition to this card. The thin cut also cuts out two little end pieces to stick out behind the bow, but I feel like these don't quite fit with the design of the card. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave them off and have a nice, simple, understated bow in the center of my wreath. I wanted to add a couple of berries onto this wreath, and I thought of using liquid pearls, but I'm in a bit of a time crunch and I don't have time for the pearls to dry. So I've chosen to grab a couple of our bitty beads, which I think are going to look just adorable on the front of this wreath. I'm going to be using liquid glass to adhere them down onto the stamped image. I'm just going to do a couple of groupings at a time, adding some dots of liquid glass along the right side of that wreath, and then using my tweezers to pick up the berries and place them on the dots of liquid glass. Once I've done one side of the wreath, then I'm going to repeat the process on the other side of the wreath. Our liquid glass dries really quickly, and it's the perfect adhesive for these little beads. Liquid glass is clear and has a glass-like finish. In fact, I used it on my last card making project when I added the bitty beads in the center of the poinsettia. Like I said, this dries really quickly, so by the time I have all of my beads put away, I can add my bow right onto the front of the card. I just love this soft stitched little bow, how understated it is on the front of that card. It's just the perfect addition to the wreath. The next step is to adhere that little money pocket into place. So I'm just going to grab some score tape here, add it onto the sides of the pocket, and fold it up onto the inside of the card. You could fill this little Christmas pocket with gift certificates, gift cards, cash, anything that you think the recipient might enjoy. I wanted to stamp a sentiment inside my card, but like I said, I haven't been able to purchase any of the new collections yet, but I did have this retired set in my stash. I couldn't decide where I wanted the sentiment, and then I remembered I had this leftover bracket that I cut out when I was using this So Happy Together stamp set. This little bracket comes with the stamp set, and it's perfect for stamping my sentiment. Here I've chosen to use evergreen ink, which matches the wreath image on the front of the card. I also decided I need a little bit of bling on my card, so I've grabbed this tiny little gold snowflake sticker from the Comfort and Joy sticker sheet, and I've placed it right there in the center of the bow. I've also grabbed a poinsettia sticker that I'm going to be placing on the side of the sentiment inside the card. Now, unfortunately, I noticed when I closed it, the poinsettia was showing through the lace. So I needed to move the sentiment over, and now when I close the card, you can't see any of the poinsettia or the sentiment. All I need to do is add my little gift, and this card is complete. There were so many fun techniques I was able to show you as we created this Christmas card today. Not only did you learn how to create this Eclipse card in Cricut Design Space, you also learned how to build a card base with this adorable little gift pocket. I just love how well those letters pair up with that wreath image. Now remember, this is not a Christmas stamp set. In fact, a lot of the items we used here today are actually in our annual catalog. The borders, that lovely paper, the wreath image, and the bow are available all the way through August of 2021. So if you wanted to, you could build yourself a bunch of Eclipse Christmas gift cards all year long and have them ready for next Christmas. I want to thank you for joining me today as we created this Eclipse pocket card. I hope that you have been enjoying our creative design team video collab entitled 31 Days of Christmas Cards. There have been so many ideas so far this month, and I can't wait to see what this design team creates next. Make sure that you have subscribed to each one of our channels and clicked that notification bell so that you're notified when we add another Christmas card video. If you've missed any of the videos in day 1 through 13, you can click on that collection icon above. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I can't wait to see what you create.